Thank you, Paul Eli. Very well done. Our next speaker is Anthony Esolen, who is a professor of English literature at Providence College. He is the editor and translator of 3 epic poems, Lucretius on the Nature of Things, Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered, and, in 3 volumes, Dante's Divine Comedy. He has published a volume of his own poetry, Peppers, and 7 other books, including Ironies of Faith, The Laughter at the Heart of Christian Literature, and I really want to read this one, 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child. I give you Anthony Esolen.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. There's actually a sequel to that book on how to destroy your child's imagination. It's called Life Under Compulsion, 10 Ways to Destroy the Humanity of your Child. I don't know why anyone in the, I hesitate to call it a culture, but whatever it is that we inhabit these days would need such books, because the projects outlined in them seem to be going on quite well on their own. One of my favorite moments in all of literature comes, as many of them do, on the mountain of purgatory. And for those of you who have not read Dante's Divine Comedy, you should be slapped. But Dante situates the mountain of purgatory in the southern hemisphere in the great ocean. We, of course, didn't know that there was an Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean, just the ocean there. In the southern hemisphere, directly opposite the globe in latitude and longitude from Calvary. So it is the mountain that Calvary makes possible to us. Dante and Virgil and their newfound friend, an ancient Roman poet Statius, whom Dante imagines as having become Christian in the early 2nd century A.D., they've entered the terrace where the vice of gluttony is purged away. Dante imagines Purgatory Mountain in the way that you would see a sort of a bald-topped Italian mountain. It's not bald. There's earthly paradise on top of this one, but you ascend the mountain by a kind of corkscrew road. So each time you round one of the terraces of the mountain, you enter into a new place where one of the 7 capital vices, one of the 7 deadly sins, is purged. The souls of the gluttons suffer so severe a purifying hunger and thirst, they're emaciated down to the bone, so Dante cannot recognize anybody by face, but one of the souls recognizes Dante. He foretells some consolation that Dante will find in the city of Lucca, when he must go into exile. And he asks a question that means everything to the art of poetry that he, this soul in the circle of gluttony, practiced upon earth. The man's name is Bonagiunta of Lucca, and he had criticized Dante and Dante's elder friend Guido Cavalcanti and their predecessor, their inspiration, Guido Guinizelli, criticized them all for bringing into poetry the terms and the ideas of the medieval schools, schoolmen. That is, for writing love poetry that was steeped in philosophy and theology. Okay? This is really actually a very interesting moment in the whole history of literature, because what Dante did was to change love poetry for centuries. Maybe we can call Bonagiunta a flat-footed, practical man of love poetry, not apt to want to soar with Dante to the heights of intellectual speculation. Now, Dante takes revenge upon many people in the Divine Comedy, although he does save many of his enemies, too. It's not as simple as that. I'm going to put my enemies down there in New Jersey, and I tell my students all the time that if they're from New Jersey, I tell my freshmen that the state motto actually comes from Dante. Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate. Of course, they don't know Italian. They say, what does it mean? What does it mean? Abandon all hope, you who enter here. Welcome to New Jersey, the Garden State. So Dante's revenge here is to put Buonaggiunta in purgatory and to revise Buonaggiunta's opinion of Dante. So here's the exchange that has to deal with poetry, beginning with Buonaggiunta. But do I see, because he's now asking whether this guy is really Dante, because he thinks he recognizes him. Do I see the introducer of the new songs and the verses that begin, ladies who have intelligence of love? Said I to him, I'm one who takes the pen when love breathes wisdom into me and go finding the signs for what he speaks within. In Italian, it's wonderful. Actually, everything is wonderful in Italian. I also tell my students that God in his mercy does not allow German to be spoken in hell. This would be, it would be insult to injury, and to speak German in hell and be forced to watch the Cleveland Browns or something like that. Anyway, when you get in Italian and tell somebody to go to hell, and it sounds sweet, vai all'inferno, you know. Here it is in Italian. I mi sono anche, says Dante, quando amor mi ispira, noto è quel modo che ditto dentro vo significando. I'm one who, when love breathes upon me, I take note. And in just the way that it is spoken to me within, I go significando, finding signs. I know of no more concise and powerful declaration of a poet's heart and mind and aim than this one. Dante portrays himself at the same time in a humble and an exalted way. It is love who breathes into him spira, the very breath of the Holy Spirit. And all that Dante does, Dante, if we consider Shakespeare a playwright and not a poet, Dante the greatest poet who ever lived, I believe, all that he does is to take note of that wisdom. He's a secretary, so to speak, and to go about significando, sign finding, submitting himself to be raised up so that he can write the line that changed love poetry in Europe for hundreds of years. Ladies who have intelligence of love. That is, ladies who have the intellect for love. Ladies who know by insight what love is. He's speaking there of something that has been banished from the awareness of people who teach in our schools. He's speaking of the intellectus, that faculty in man that strikes to the heart of truth with an immediate vision, leaving discursive reason, much less empirical observation, worlds and worlds behind. I wonder about people who seem to suggest, as they draft curricula for schools, that the only way to come to knowledge is by empirical investigation. How do they know, then, that they love a person whom they have just met? Is that also subject to trial and error? It doesn't seem to make any sense. In fact, all the most important things in life are not the results of hypothesis and testing. Not at all. That's just a very narrow way. That's a way to come to knowledge about certain things, but most knowledge leaves that far behind. I'm thinking of this scene today because this instruction in love, by love, and for love, is as far from anything that our schools do as is the highest mountain from the bottom of the sea, or the heavens from the earth. Now, I've written a great deal in favor of such an amatory education and against the crass and ultimately useless utilitarianism of such things as the common curse. It's useless utilitarianism. I give you all free rein to use that phrase. Utilitarianism is self-refuting by performance. It is a disutility to believe in it, even before you disprove it intellectually. It makes people miserable. The common curse is like the curse of Adam raised to the third power, as if God had said to Adam, "In the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat dust." I've wondered aloud whether the authors of that curriculum, unfit for higher robots, And here I'll take a jest from my friend David Hart, the Eastern Orthodox theologian. He believes that all young materialists, when they are boys and girls, have a dream of growing up someday to be a robot. It's a curriculum unfit for those, let alone for human children. I wonder if they've ever known what wonder was. So intent have they been to shut up in a closet all the noblest thoughts and aspirations of the human soul. They, with the counting house mind of Ebenezer Scrooge, but without the humor. Now think of that for a second. And without any prospect of specters coming to haunt them and save them. Poetry, bah, humbug. Something else is on my mind today besides that, besides the crassness of utilitarianism and its foolish disutility. It's another good that poetry brings, another way that a truly Catholic, or generally speaking Christian education in the liberal arts, can raise the soul to see a glimmer of what Dante wishes us to see. This something else is on my mind because of recent events at Providence College where I teach, and I don't want to bore you with the details up here, but if you are curious, you can ask me. Let it suffice to say that I've become painfully aware that there is a chasm between teachers who, like me, love the liberal arts, what I've called the free-making arts, and those whose utilitarianism or whose inverted religion has taken the form of, it's not my phrase, identity politics, okay? Which has basically taken over our schools also. When I was young, when I was the age of my students at Providence College, when I was young, I wanted to know Dante. My professor at Princeton told me, you know, Tony, you have to learn Italian. I said, yes, sir, because you have to read Dante in the original. I wanted to know Dante because I wanted to know everything, but mainly because I was in love with poetry, and I wanted to learn the craft from the masters. I was hungry. It never occurred to me to think that the grandson of coal miners in America could not lay claim to Dante or Shakespeare or Caravaggio or Aristotle or any artist or thinker or mystical seer just because these people lived long ago, came from another part of the world, spoke a different language from mine, and were nourished in cultures which, for all that these cultures were ancestors of my culture, were so distant from me. This is something that I find hard to grasp, as if I were at the doors of the Sistine Chapel and inviting students to come in and see the paintings of Michelangelo and Perugino and all the others, and the student would say to me, well, I don't really wish to go in there. Well, why not? Well, this is a bunch of Renaissance Italian guys painted these things. Well, so? Yes, but I'm not Renaissance Italian. I'm whatever it is that I am, but I'm not that. It doesn't matter to me. It's very strange. I don't understand that. I'm going to have to try to put myself in the mind of somebody who would say such a thing. I'm going to try to do that here today. If these people wrote in a different language, what was that to me? I learned that language, if I could. If they came from another part of the world, I learned about that other part of the world and its geography. If other cultures nourished them, then I tried, haltingly, of course, at first, but I tried to place myself in their midst. I tried to walk with Dante along the streets of Florence, that city riven with partisan passions, and all too often running with blood. I did not need these works to affirm my identity. I was not even aware that I had an identity, other than that I was a certain young man with my name, American by birth, and Roman Catholic, and a fan of the St. Louis Cardinals, by the grace of God. But I've come to see that many of my students now have no such grounding. They have no such matter-of-course assurance of who they are and what they are. If the self is nourished by culture, and if culture implies deep roots, and carefully tended soil, if, as we've heard this morning, you understand yourself implicitly, and it doesn't even have to rise to the level of consciousness, as being a member of a pilgrimage, of people that have had a history that are going someplace, right? What happens to the self when the cultural topsoil is stripped bare? To put it another way, what happens when there's no longer a mountain of purgatory aimed towards heaven and guides along the way that cry, sursum corda, lift up your hearts? To think about that mountain of purgatory, it's the most human of the three realms in Dante's Divine Comedy. And he has the happy inspiration of placing it on earth, on the surface of the earth rather than below, and pointing, as all human things must inevitably do, towards what transcends the merely human, towards heaven. What happens when the primacy of worship fades? What happens when there are no more spires in your world? Then you have to fashion yourself. That is actually something of the title of a book by this Harvard professor, Stephen Greenblatt, who is a brilliant writer and a detestable thinker. And of course, being both, he's the most influential critic of the English Renaissance that there is now in the world, because he is both soulless and a very good crafter of words. You have to fashion yourself. That puts you in an utterly precarious position. It's as if you had on your own, without genuine culture, to bridge the chasm between unmeaning and meaning. The only material you could use, because you know no history, by the way, I've now taken to asking my freshmen, college freshmen, I'm always teaching freshmen at Providence College, even the honors kids, whether they recognize the names of certain English writers. And I'll tell them up front, these are the names of certain English writers, okay? I just want you to tell me whether you recognize the names. John Milton. And 3/4 of my honors students do not recognize that name. That ratio rises closer to 100% when I'm talking to students who are not honors kids. And if we move from Milton to somebody like Alfred Lord Tennyson, almost nobody. Nobody recognized the name. So they have nothing to work with. The only material you can use to build that rickety bridge is your own self. Hence the desperation, and I've only begun to see this, with which so many young people and the professors who mislead them hang on to some marker of identity, some sense that they exist, that they belong to a community, even if the community is abstract and notional, even if it is no more than an oval in a Venn diagram designating the collective of people who self-identify in a certain way because of, now we get into the usual categories, because of ethnicity or race or sexual proclivities or whatnot. Now, it's not quite right to think of them as narcissistic, as I have done recently and been taken to task for it. They are too ill to be narcissistic. They're not staring in love at some beautiful image of themselves in a pool. They're staring into the pool to find any clear image of a self at all. So if you subject their beliefs to any criticism, and by beliefs I'm thinking of a kind of delicate spider web of assumptions about the world that cannot endure the slightest breeze. If you do that, they do not respond with reasoned argument, but with anger and terror. I mean, think of this for a moment. If you have somebody whose sense of self, let's use just for an example, because the example pops to my mind. The example of a young person whose sense of self is tied up with an ideology of feminism. And you show that person that, in fact, the whole history of the human race has not been one miserable story of how big bad men have oppressed women, but that, in fact, the sexes have largely cooperated with one another to survive, and that their relations are far more complicated than she assumes and involve such things as love. It's as if her world would come crashing down. You mean I don't get to believe in unremitting and blackest oppression? They're actually disappointed to learn that Grandpa was not quite so evil as they'd supposed. That's very strange. Well, but we can make sense of it if we see that our students these days, and many of their elders too, many of their professors, have nothing else but that to ground them as selves. It's as if you were prying their fingertips from the brink and abandoning them to the abyss. So, what can the words of Dante and Buonaggiunta then mean to anybody in that condition? There's nothing in those words that has anything really to do with the preoccupations of self-identifying these days that are common right now. This is nothing really about imperialism or colonialism or race or sexual congress. Nothing there that the self-fashioner of our time can grab hold of. There's nothing that the politician can use, or the identity politician. The young person with no culture and without the faith is then stretched taut over emptiness and cannot turn his head toward the stars. Ladies who have intelligence of love, donne che avete intelletto d'amore. What does that have to do with me when I'm fighting every moment to establish who I am, to establish that I am in a world that is atomized and lonely? So here's the thing. We're thinking about Catholic education now, Christian education generally, must not raise up our young people to be in that condition in the first place. The faith is not something we do, like fly fishing or playing chess. Faith is meant to inform every motion of our lives. It's like a royal dye that is to penetrate to the heart of every fiber of our souls. This is, of course, the ideal towards which we strive. But then, so too, all of our loves are imperfect. We do not therefore cease to believe that love is essentially the total gift of self, even when we fail to make that total gift, fail again and again. The secret of human identity that the politicians seek in the wrong places is the secret of faith and hope and love. We do not only give ourselves away, we become ourselves by the gift. We become who we are by forgetting to think about who we are. And so it is that a truly liberal education, a free-making education, is in accord with what Jesus says, that he who humbles himself shall be exalted, and with what St. Paul says, that it is he who acts, but also not he, rather Christ in him, and with what St. John says when he says, children, what we will be has not yet been revealed, but we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So I return to this scene on the mountain now. We see four poets, Dante, his humbled rival Buonaggiunta, his teacher and his authority Virgil, and Statius, who has said that without Virgil's poetry to guide him, all his own work was not worth a dram. It was my mama and my nurse, says Statius. To place yourself among those men thinking of poetry, the very history of poetry, stretching by Dante's time more than 1,300 years, thinking of poetry and of love, not what I happen to desire, but love, the love that moves the sun and the other stars, the love that created this world. Thinking about all of that with gratitude and manly acknowledgement of one's superior is to be lifted beyond yourself, is to fall with Statius to the feet of Virgil, to be raised up beyond the petty and transient concerns of the day. I had colleagues the other day at Providence College, apparently I wasn't in that day, who it seemed as if the whole world had caved in the Wednesday after Election Day. And I said, is there nothing in your world beyond politics? It's as if the country were doomed. Well, of course the country is doomed. What did you think? Every human thing is doomed. You have nothing beyond that. It's to bow your head with Dante when Beatrice finally appears on the mountaintop. Well, that is to know yourself indeed and to be capable of knowing others without subordinating them to a calculus of utility or without pigeonholing them into the designated groups designated by politics of the day. It is to refer politics back to its worthy but subordinate place. As I say, politics is more than a necessary evil. It is a good thing in itself, like outhouses. It's to stand on the far side of the chasm, advancing into the land of meaning. It is to listen to love as Dante listens. And if you are not a sign finder yourself, it is to behold the signs that others before you have found. It is to stand tall and free and to look to the stars. Thank you.